Some current and former White House officials are beginning to think about their next professional move as the Trump presidency comes to an end. But as William Cohan of Vanity Fair writes, these people might have a hard time washing off, as he puts it, Trump stink. And even despite some efforts to do so, people like Gary Cohn are already facing backlash professionally for their association with President Trump. For more on this, let's bring in William Cohn. He is a special correspondent for Vanity Fair. William, thanks for being with us. So for people who don't know, what do you mean when you say Trump stink? And how did the attack on the U.S. Capitol and the president's subsequent second impeachment make longtime associates of the Trump family really work so hard to distance themselves now?
Well, I think, Lana, that anybody who was thinking about joining the Trump administration from the outset knew that they were going to be taking some reputational risk in joining the administration. And I think a lot of people did, thinking they could be helpful and try to temper some of Donald Trump's more base instincts. And I think that's why people like Gary Cohn joined the administration, or Anthony Scaramucci, or Jim Mattis, or John Kelly. And I think all of them found out, of course, that they couldn't temper his base instincts and decided for whatever reason to leave. Either mostly they were fired or chose to resign. And I think a lot of them now sort of face the reputational damage that many people thought they would be facing, inevitably anyway. And I think that's what you're finding with people like Gary Cohn. Not everyone, of course, but a lot of them are now, as they're leaving, streaming out of the administration, are finding that it's not going to be so easy to get the job that they hoped that they would. And usually, serving in a presidential administration is enhancing to one's career, and I'm not so sure that's going to be the case this time.
Well, you mentioned now Gary Cohn twice. That's President Trump's first director of the National Economic Council and economic policy advisor. He's just become a vice chairman at IBM. He's also a member of their executive leadership team. What were some of the reactions to him being hired by the company?
I think a lot of people are sort of in disbelief that Gary Cohn, who, of course, was the former number 2 at Goldman Sachs, the chief operating officer and president. Before he went into the administration, he had lost his job at Goldman and needed a new job, and then became national economic advisor. I never would have expected Gary, who I've known for a long time, to take a job at big tech, let alone IBM, let alone as sort of vice chairman. The other interesting thing, Lana, is that earlier, later last year, he completed what was known as a SPAC, he completed a SPAC, which is a fund that he used to raise money from investors to go out and buy a company. And he's the co-chairman of that SPAC, Special Purpose Acquisition Company. And just when they raised that money, which was around $828 million, he's now leaving to go to IBM. So it does sort of raise questions about how he could possibly do both.
And by contrast, the example that you write about is Anthony Scaramucci. He emerged, you said, quote, with his reputation relatively intact and arguably enhanced. Why has he been able to successfully rid himself of his past association with President Trump?
Well, one of the main reasons is because Trump fired him after 11 days. And so he did not get as tarnished as others or have to be put into position to defend, 4.5 years of Trump's presidency and the campaign after he got the nomination. So, and now people know who Anthony Scaramucci is. He's a hedge fund manager from New York, and he's now regularly, asked to be a pundit about Trump and Trumpism. So I would say that basically his reputation has been certainly not tarnished and perhaps enhanced.
Do you think that that people like Scaramucci and others who are trying to distance themselves from their association with the Trump administration need to actually turn on the administration or turn on the president? In your article, you talk about Scaramucci and his work with Project Lincoln. Do you think that for some of these former Trump administration officials, particularly some of them that have just resigned in protest recently, that is going to be an effective strategy for disassociating themselves from all the negative connotations of the Trump label?
Can they rehabilitate themselves is the question. And, I think one thing that Anthony Scaramucci has done very well is he's basically been very frank and open and honest about what it was like to work for Trump, even if it was 11 days. Others have been much more circumspect, like Jim Mattis and John Kelly. They've said some things that provide some insight into what it was like, but not as much as one would expect. In the case of Gary Cohn, he has been, except for sort of coming out against Trump publicly as a result of Charlottesville. I remember having an interview with Gary in April 2018, literally a few weeks after he left the administration, and he told me any number of incredible things about what it was like to work for Donald Trump on a daily basis, and that he would never let me publish them. So, and he's since then never really been frank with the American people about just how awful it was working for Donald Trump. And obviously, he told me these things. I'm not at liberty, unfortunately, because he won't let me, to tell you these things. But he's known about the way Donald Trump behaved for years, and he's kept silent. Well, to me, I don't think somebody who does that deserves to be the vice chairman of IBM. I think if these people want rehabilitation, they have to come clean about what it was like to work for Donald Trump and why they enabled him in his really horrific behavior.
Well, especially after the assault on the Capitol, we have seen businesses pull their relationship with not only President Trump, but for people who stood in opposition to certifying the election results, for people who continued to publicly spread the false, that outright lie about the election in this country. For the people who continue to stand by the president, I'm speaking about officials, of course. Do you think that they will be siloed into professions that are aligned with President Trump, or do you think that after some measure of time that Trump stink that you talk about will fade?
I think it's going to be very, very difficult for people who associated themselves so publicly with this tremendously bad and deceptive behavior. I think it's going to be very difficult for them to get jobs in. I think a number of them are probably already finding that it's difficult to do that. And I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, before they're able to do that. So again, if they come clean, if they share what it was really like and explain why they took so long and ask for forgiveness, I think the American people are forgiving. But there are a lot of people who, like Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, or Wilbur Ross. There are people in corporate America who, of course, appreciate what they did in terms of reducing the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. And there are people who support Trump who probably will be happy to hire people like that, or back them financially. If Steve Mnuchin wants to raise another hedge fund or another private equity fund, I bet there are people out there who will do that. But for people who, and Steve Mnuchin is already well off, so he does not need to ever work again. But for people who do need to work again, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to get the Trump stink off of them.
All right, William Cohan, thank you.
Thank you.